everyone, and welcome to the Singularity Lab, your home for breaking stories in science, technology, and futurism. My name is Michael Mataluni. I'm going to be your host today, and I've got two amazing co-hosts with me. Joining me today is Luis Jimenez, the creator of the Unidentified Celebrity Review and the brainchild of the Big Phone Home. Welcome, Luis. How's it going?
Hey, buddy. What's shaking?
Good to see you, man. It's been a minute.
It's been a hot second. Yeah, you've been in Mexico. You've been narco-sing it. Narco-sing it? Is that a thing?
Narco-ing it? I don't know.
Well, the Narcos is the name of the show. Yeah, I think you're right. Narcoing it. You've been narcoing it. What's up, buddy?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I actually, it was funny because as we landed in Mexico, I started getting all of these texts from folks saying, did you hear what happened in Mexico? And, you know, there was apparently a shooting and there was some narco shootings on some of the resorts. And so I was like, well, yeah, but I'm from Orlando. Like, there's a shooting every day. Like, it's not.
Is there a shooting every day?
I mean, not every day.
Parts of Orlando.
Yeah, not every day, but you know, I mean, it's like people think like, you know, Cancun in Mexico is like a third world country. I mean, it wasn't what people were making me afraid of. So anyway, we had a wonderful time. We had an opportunity to hang out, Kristen and I, and she's actually not here today because she had to run the kids around. But anyway, we've got an amazing show, and it's great to see you, buddy.
Yeah, man, pleasure.
We've also got another co-host joining us today, Brooks Lopez. Brooks is a program planner in the defense industry. He has degrees in psychology with a focus on neuroscience and learning and memory. He also has an MBA with a focus on international business. Welcome, Brooks Lopez. What's going on, brother?
Hey, gentlemen. How you guys doing?
Good to see you. Good to see you. What's new with you, buddy?
Not too much. No?
I'm
reading. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'm working on getting through this stack by the end of the year.
Oh my God.
Jesus, man.
What is that?
And just a bunch of books. It's been that kind of quarter. I've been enjoying it. It's been great. I'll have to make some recommendations at some point. But
yes, please do.
Maybe we'll get you a book club.
I need to. I think about it. You see all the shelves behind me too. Like I've got a problem.
Well, are those books in a certain subject or area of interest?
No, they're all over the place. Like I'm looking at, let's see, what do I have? I've got Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman by Richard Feynman. I've got Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. I've got Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. I've got a Teddy Roosevelt biopic.
I might have to steal Brooks for my show. I'm gonna have him fill in on Monday and Wednesday, and you just stick to Fridays.
He is a gentleman and a scholar, so
more a scholar, less a gentleman. But that's neither here nor there. One thing I will say though is that Mike can say all he wants to about there may be a shooting anywhere, like on any day in Orlando, but the part of the greater Orlando area that Mike lives in, like you're worried about getting hit by a rubber band, like at best, like on a bad day.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. He might get one of those like cartoon pies to the face.
Or he's going to get like probably conned by Girl Scouts is probably the most dangerous thing that's going to happen.
He got taken for $65 yesterday from Girl Scouts at Publix.
And they still deliver cookies, but you know.
Yeah. If you guys are done ganging up on me, I know it's great to have you both here. It's really, really fucking wonderful.
We didn't realize Orlando was
go to Orlando, so it's kind of like a.
I know I can't recall all of the gangster rap music videos shot in Orlando. It's like, wait a second.
We do have a street that's called Miramore. I'll give you one guess what you can find there, but
you guys are the worst. All right, so I love you too. All right, so we are going to start the show as we normally do with our cognitive bias and logical fallacy for the day. For those of you who aren't too familiar with this, one of the most important things that we like to do here on the Singularity Lab is dispel myths. And one of the things that helps us create myths is cognitive bias, because our brains are wired to reduce the amount of information coming in order to live life. So it's not your fault if you have bias, but it is important to take a look at those. So today's logical fallacy is ad hominem. Attacking your opponent's character or personal traits in an attempt to undermine their argument. Example, after Sally presents an eloquent and compelling case for a more equitable taxation system, Sam asks the audience whether we should believe anything from a woman who isn't married and probably eats her own boogers.
So slut shaming was the ad hominem.
I think that's the slut shaming was the ad hominem attack in that example. Yes. And we see it a lot. Like, instead of arguing about the substance of an argument or a particular point in an argument, you see people all the time just flinging mud. And I think that, if we can do less of that here on the Singularity Lab and in the greater world in general, I think we're going to be in a better place. So
absolutely. I think that's amongst the most common you see, particularly in political discourse, is the ad hominem logical fallacy.
Yep, 100%.
I was going to say, where I get that a lot? That, oh, well, you don't know because you've never been there. Military personnel. Where if you've got a viewpoint on war and where our troops should be, it's like, what do you know? You've never been there. You've never trained in the military. It's just like, yeah, but I could look at a budget, and I could see that it's a waste of money. It's a waste of lives. It hasn't, improved my life as an American. It's just brought a lot of pain to your side of the fence. I'm saying this because
you're talking to somebody in the defense industry. Brooks is in the defense industry, so he's actually
look at his face. He's like, "You've never been there. You've never been there. What the hell do you know?"
Response. My response is our dollars go into R&D mostly, so we've got enough tanks. I have no doubt in stating that there's enough of the same old. If you want to spend money on something that's going to move the entire world.
Cyber defense is going to be critical moving forward, and and I think that's a great opening for our guest right now, who is Franc Milburn. He is a former UK intelligence officer and paratrooper with over 22 years of experience producing threat and risk assessment and providing strategic and operational advice to a variety of Fortune 500 companies, aerospace, and government clients. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, the one, the only Franc Milburn. Frank, how are you?
Hey guys, nice to be on. Nice to see you all.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And before I want to dig into your history and your past and what brought you to this point today. But before we do that, I just want to acknowledge John Russell with a $50 super chat. Thank you so much for supporting the show, John. It's always appreciated. He says, I wish that we'd dedicate funds and research into making the esoteric practical and able to be experienced in the physical realms of healing of body and mind in reliable and relatable ways without dogmas of either science or religion. Much respect, John. I definitely appreciate that perspective. All right, Frank. So, man, you have a pretty incredible history. Can you get us up to speed on where you started? Obviously, you were in UK intelligence, and you're very much a player when it comes to geopolitics and risk assessment and defense. Can you give us a kind of a breakdown of your experience in that field?
Yeah, sure. I served in UK military intelligence via the British Army. I have had an educational background. I did a degree in international relations at the London School of Economics, which I was very fortunate to do, and which has always stood me in good stead. On the geopolitical risk side, I kind of developed that both working for sort of security and investigations companies who were doing, sort of pre-market entry reports for companies who are looking either to invest in a country or sometimes, they were having problems in country and they wanted to divest, but they were kind of vested interest keeping them there, or there was something going on. They were an extractive industry and, they wanted to know what was the possibility of a military coup, or if there'd been a military takeover, how would it affect their mining operation, for example. So I honed that kind of side of the geopolitical consulting as sort of an external player for companies. And then I also did it sort of from the inside as well, kind of as an in-house sort of intelligence and security manager for oil and gas companies. So I was a regional security manager in North Africa, a country security manager in Iraq for oil and gas companies. So I really advised them on kind of all aspects of not only the sort of the geopolitical risk and security risks associated with operating in those areas, but also on kind of regulatory risks, on vested interest, key players, and how those could affect their operations. So that's really how I came to it, including working with some American partners, some former DIA and FBI types, working with American and international aerospace companies, basically providing them with advice, mainly security, counterintelligence related.
Wow. I want to dig into that some more. Would you mind doing me a quick favor, Frank? You're getting a little bit of feedback on your mic. Do you mind just unplugging maybe and plugging back in and see if that fixes the problem?
Copy that.
It's coming through a little robotic. Are you guys hearing that, or is it just me?
I didn't.
Yeah?
No, I didn't.
Maybe
I didn't notice anything.
A touch. But I mean, I could hear you quite clearly, Frank. But it might be.
Okay.
I'm getting
Is
it
that
on
sounding
Brooks'
better now,
end
guys?
a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, it is. Are you getting it on Brooks
Good.
too?
Yeah, well, I get that. I'm definitely getting like a little bit of feedback, or not feedback, but just breaking with Brooks' signal.
All right. Well, we'll
figure it out.
Yeah, so we'll figure it out. It's live. It's live, baby.
Yeah, man,
we're live,
baby. This is the first world problems.
Absolutely. Okay, so Frank, can you dig a little more into your interest in what you call post-quantum military technologies? You wrote an article recently about this. Was this something that specifically came up for you in your study of the UAP phenomena, or was this something you were interested in previously?
Well, I was always interested in kind of advances in military affairs. I mean, I was also educated at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, which is the the British Army equivalent of America's West Point. So as a young officer, you do kind of defense and international affairs, kind of military and war studies. So that was back in the kind of the early 90s. So it was very much about, the revolution that was then taking place in military affairs, and that we'd just seen with, America and her allies like the UK, in the sort of new and novel technologies that they displayed in the first Iraq war. So I've always been interested in war studies and military technology. In terms of the UAP, the post-quantum revolution in military affairs, that was something that I really touched on in the first paper that I wrote for the Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. I was looking at the sort of capabilities of UAPs, their susceptibility to weaponry that the United States and other countries might have, what kind of technologies UAP might utilize, and the post-quantum part of it came up in terms of I should really kind of explain what I mean by that. What I really meant was what we were seeing with, especially with the Tic Tac and with UFOs. I mean, going back 70 years is something just like so far advanced of what we have. And the post-quantum aspect, I came up for that for my first paper as a subject heading, mainly because of when the Tic Tac went to the cap point. So I was having a conversation with Dr. Jack Sarfati, who features quite prominently in the paper, the physicist. So I was asking, how did a Tic Tac, know about the cap point, and how did it get there? So I was speculating. So was it wired into Navy communications? Was there an agent aboard one of the ships, like a temporal agent, right, who was advising the Tic Tac? Was the Tic Tac reading people's minds? Did it have some kind of was it decrypting and reading sort of data and navigation systems, or was there some kind of post-quantum, i.e., something that's completely past what we know in terms of quantum computing? Was there some kind of post-quantum advanced predictive algorithm that was enabling the Tic Tac to anticipate and to figure out where effectively where the cap point would be? The other thing as well, I've been speaking about this recently, is I with Jack Sarfati, he hypothesizes that Tic Tacs are basically our technology from the future. So that was another one. Another theory was the Tic Tac already aware of where the cap point would be because it came from the future? But that's really where the post-quantum angle comes from. Right. And I applied that in my first paper, and then in my second paper, that was the Pentagon's UAP task force. And then in my second paper, American Development of UAP Technology, a fait accompli. I really kind of dug further into the sort of the characteristics of UAP based on what I thought were groundbreaking interviews with Luis Elizondo by that UFO podcast and the Project Unity. There were two very groundbreaking interviews around about March this year, and that's what I based really the back of my second paper on. And then with more sort of theorizing by Dr. Jack Sarfati, and then I also brought in Colonel John Alexander because of his sort of deep experience in running both black and white some multi-billion dollar projects at the Pentagon.
So let me ask you this. In your research, I mean, one of the biggest challenges that we all have in understanding this UAP phenomena is how do we break it down and begin to interpret the data that we have? Because it's so incredibly limited, right? We have eyewitness accounts, which are important. We have eyewitness accounts from trained observers, which is important. We have some radar data. Based on the data that you've been able to accumulate, what obviously, you know, it's interesting to speculate and to, you know, we interviewed Sarfati here on this show as well. And it's truly a fascinating topic and speculation. But I think it's challenging because so many folks, you know, to hear the idea of humans coming back from the future and this is responsible for the Tic Tac, it's far out for people, right? And it's something for me that I love to discuss because I'm fascinated by the topic and the concept. But, you know, stepping back for a moment, how do you really get grounded when it comes to the facts we have and the interpretations you're making?
Okay, well, first of all, I mean, you know, I don't know, right? I have the answers. And I refer back to something that, you know, Colonel John Elizondo is always saying, that it's just like amazingly complicated, and it's probably, you know, more complex than cancer, you know, he says. And I think it's very, very difficult to interpret it from our standpoint. I believe that there's only, you know, there's probably very few people actually within the classified world who do have an understanding of what some of the intelligences are behind UAP and maybe their intentions as well. But for the rest of us, it's very, very difficult. I think a good place to start, I mean, even before you get the data, is you know, Jacques Vallée and Dr. Eric Davis paper on high strangeness. Because, you know, I originally came at this as kind of like a nuts and bolts guy, right? I was thinking, okay, I'm a former military intelligence officer. There's stuff flying around in the sky. It's like, you know, it's physical craft. You know, what is it? Is it aliens? Is it something else? But, you know, kind of nuts and bolts. But then once you get into the whole high strangeness, which is also as well brought out in the new book, you know, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. And they were looking at the criteria and saying, look, you know, you can't just look at the nuts and bolts aspect. You've got to look at, like, you know, the psychology of it as well. You've got to look at the cultural aspects. There's like 6 different fields that they look at. So it's amazingly complicated. And I mean, when you get to somewhere like Skinwalker, I mean, how do you kind of quantify that in terms of all the different phenomena that you're experiencing there, kind of all in one place? I mean, is it associated with UFOs? Is it completely separate from UFOs? You know, cryptids, UFOs, poltergeist activity, disembodied voices, you know, orbs, all in one place. How do you account for that? So I think it's very, very difficult. But I think that I believe that there's hard data based on the people that I speak to, you know, inside the classified world and inside the scientific world, based on what they know about craft, based on what they've been told, and this is hypothesis, or it's not. I'm not putting this forward as fact, but based on what people have told me, what they've been told by people who are not from here, based on examination of retrieved craft, and also based on you know, efforts to re-engineer those craft and produce, you know, kind of like a knockoff copies effectively. So the data is there. It's just we outside the classified world, we don't have a lot of access to it.
Yes. And I think that's probably the most frustrating part for all of us, right? Especially if we have interest in getting to the bottom. And, you know, I definitely know what you mean by coming from the nuts and bolts perspective, but I also come from you know, I'm also incredibly intrigued by the Fermi paradox. I'm always looking to figure out, well, how on earth is it possible? We know we're not alone in the universe. We know there are Goldilocks planets, and these are revelations that have come around in the last 20, 30 years even. You know, kids growing up in the 60s didn't even know that there were exoplanets in the Goldilocks zone, right? And so the idea of extraterrestrials was simply a fun exercise or an interesting, you know, fiction. It wasn't anything that you could really point to as something that could be close to reality. But now in science, we know how many potentially habitable worlds are in our galaxy alone. And we mention this statistic quite often here in the Singularity Lab, that there are 10 stars in our galaxy for every grain of sand on Earth. I mean, these things are incomprehensible. How is it possible that we haven't been visited? How is it possible that, there isn't something more going on in the galaxy than we've put our finger on? So I'm incredibly open to the possibilities. My challenge has always been, it's all locked up and classified. How do we actually get our hands on this stuff? But we're seeing changes, right? We're seeing the Gillibrand amendment. You actually mentioned that you spoke to Mellon today about that. Do you want to share a little bit about what your thoughts are on the amendment, and then maybe expound on what you mentioned earlier?
Certainly, yeah. In terms of the amendment, I mean, I found it fascinating. It seemed to me, and I'll put Chris Mellon's comments after, just to kind of like balance it out. But I think in terms of like the data sharing and members of the intelligence community having to report back to Congress, like why they're not data sharing if they're found to be not data sharing, that would seem to me to be kind of like an attempt to break up not only the stovepipe, but also going further down the line, maybe the sort of special access programs on UAP, because otherwise you're basically going to be in contempt of Congress if you're a special access program being run out of DoD or the Department of Energy, for example, and you're not sharing, or you're deliberately withholding data on UAP. Okay, you're going to find yourself in contempt of Congress, right, further down the line. So that would seem to me to be an attempt to not only sort of dissolve the stovepiping, but also to get at the special access programs. Also, if you look at the crash retrievals, I mean, I assume it's crash retrievals, right? Yes, they're saying to rapidly respond to conduct field investigations of incidents. And then they go into personnel, equipment, and resources. And it says the director and the secretary, because the future office will either be under the DoD or it'll be under the DoD and the Secretary of Defense and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So it says to ensure the designated organization have available adequate personnel with requisite expertise, equipment, transportation, and other resources necessary to respond rapidly to incidents. Right. So as I said, previously, this isn't this isn't like getting a hire car, right, and going to look at a crop circle and maybe you get like a daily food allowance, right, for Burger King. This is full on. If you're going to look at something maybe that's come down, or to retrieve parts of something, I mean, you might have to build a road into the area if it's a remote area. You've also got to coordinate and control it. So these resources, I mean, when I see that, I immediately think Special Operations Command. And maybe parts of the, like the 75th Ranger Regiment. So they'll be going in, coordinating, controlling. Yeah, JSOC basically. And also, assets of the
Joint Special.
Sorry, say again.
Command.
Yeah. Joint Special Operations Command. Yeah, got it. And also as well, you're looking at the U.S. Air Force. I mean, what do? Pararescue. They do retrieving of aircraft and aircrew. Trained to do that in contested environments, okay, and there's a fairly large, Air Force special operations community by comparison with other militaries. So those are the kind of resources that you're looking at. Also, aircraft, heavy transport aircraft, heavy lift helicopters. You might need, bridging equipment, engineering equipment, digging equipment. You might have to bring something up out of a lake that's in the middle of the mountains in the middle of nowhere. So that is really, really something extremely significant to me. That's to me has got crash retrievals right written all over it. And again, that goes to breaking down, in my humble opinion, the power of some of these unacknowledged special access programs. Because if it's now mandating that this new office, effectively, that reports the Secretary of Defense and or SecDef and the Director of National Intelligence, then they're going to be responsible for crash retrievals. They're going to be responsible for exploiting the technology that comes from those crash retrievals, and they're going to eventually, I think, want to have access to crash retrievals that have already been obtained. So those are the key ones that stood out. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I have two questions for that. The first is, you're talking about the more clearly elucidated budget for that. Do you think that budget was already there, but just kind of rolled under other I guess, funding procedures so that it wasn't quite as clear as it was before?
You mean budget?
Truly new funding.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they got around that. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not an expert on, congressional procedure or any of the sort of the jockeying that goes on behind back doors to get there. But it's interesting in terms of budget. I would ask, if you're going to be calling on, say, for example, there's a major investigation to be done or a retrieval, effectively. Whose budget would that come out of? For example, would the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers be paying for the engineering equipment that they would provide? Would the Air Force be paying for the aircraft and the flight hours that they're providing? Would JSOC be paying for the personnel and the resources that it provides? So that would be quite interesting. And I'm not sure if that would happen on the budget that the new department has. So, but then again, it does say. Basically, it just says that they will get the resources that they want, and everybody has to provide it.
Right.
I thought the other area that was interesting, very, very interesting, was, and this is a key point, under the science plan, where it says to provide the foundation for potential future investments to replicate any such advanced characteristics and performance. Right. Now, I've theorized, and in my second paper, American Development of UAP Technology, a fait accompli, which I'll come back to, I theorize that that's basically part of a kind of like an Elizondo Mellon plan to get at the various unacknowledged special access programs and kind of like pry the information out of them, which this Gillibrand amendment would seem to indicate would be happening further down the line, and then to unite those programs under an overarching kind of Manhattan Project 2 style kind of effort, which is basically the thrust of my second paper. And if I can actually quote from Elizondo in that, this was back in March, right? I wrote this paper. So he says, the timeline isn't up to me. Congress and government is going to respond if they feel there's an interest by the people to do X, Y, Z, right? So well done, guys. Then they're going to lead the charge of doing that and making sure it's properly resourced. Okay. And then flicking down, and he says, Project Unity asks him, how realistic would funding for such a project be, building or designing this technology and making these breakthroughs? And then Elizondo says, the establishment of the UAP task force was a step in the right direction towards that goal, being able to put our time, resources, and talents into that topic. And he says, when it comes to your question, so far as will the government ever galvanize itself to pursue the endeavor? I do. I think once it accepts the reality that these UAP are real, then it's almost a fait accompli. And now we have the Gillibrand Amendment. And I asked Chris Mellon about today, and this is just, I'm going to balance it out. And he said to me, I put this directly to him. I said, you guys want to have like a program? And I didn't expect him to kind of divulge like America's, next generational post-quantum research strategy to me. But he said, this has nothing whatsoever to do with SAP management. Also, we are getting a bit of ahead of ourselves talking about advisory membership when the legislation has not yet gone to Congress, much less been signed into law. If enacted as presently written, then it will be Abi's call, talking about Avi Loeb. Because I also asked him if he and Lou would be on the advisory committee. But that was Chris Mellon's comments. But I said, is it about crash retrievals? Is it about, you and Lou getting this big program to kind of unite the SAPs? Because Eric Davis, remember, he said, with Alejandro Rojas in April last year, 2020, he said that when there's a bottleneck in a research program, in an unacknowledged special access program, you can't just go and ask your mate in another program if he can help you with like the physics or with the engineering because of compartmentalization. So as I said, this is my theory that Elizondo and Mellon, they want to have a Manhattan project, and it seems that Elizondo was enunciating that in my second paper in those interviews, that they want to have this program, bring all the smaller programs together, and then they can advance the research and basically get there before China and Russia do.
Do you believe that this Gillibrand amendment was influenced by Mellon and Elizondo?
Yeah.
I asked him, yeah. What did I ask him? I did, yeah. No, I was straight in there. I said, where are we? I said, yeah, hi, I'm assuming you had no small part in the Gillibrand amendment. The wording seems to echo what you've been saying, writing. Congratulations, all that. Will this now be part of the NDAA going forward? He didn't say anything. I mean, he's a pretty straight up guy. He either gives a reply or he just doesn't say anything. That's the way that I found with him. So he didn't say anything on that.
Well, I mean, when you compare his blogs to the amendment, there's a lot of stuff that mirrors. The wording of it mirrors pretty. it's the worst kept secret right now, in my opinion. But Christopher Mellon absolutely had a hand in it. But going back to crash retrievals, honestly, I don't think that's going to be a big part of the budget here, because how many crashes happen a year? You know, like if we're lucky, one. You know, but I think that's a way high number. One, I would doubt.
Well, but wait a second. There's also a UAV element to be discussed here, because when you're talking about drones and you're talking about potential crashes from adversarial drones, that could be. I mean, wouldn't that be a part of this budget?
Sure, or satellites. I mean, there's a lot. There's other.
Well, they're going to be looking at all of it, Michael. All of it. Right. You know, the name of the office is the Anomaly, Surveillance, and Resolution Office. So they're trying to get resolutions to things that they are seeing, that the pilots are reporting. They're putting it into the buckets that they talked about in the preliminary report that was public and everybody got to see. It's the one that we're interested in is other. What is going in this other bucket? And the beautiful thing about this, and we've been talking about it ad nauseum with Jazz, is this bill has teeth. If this office goes to an intelligence community and says, hey, we know you've got this data. We need this data. And it's congressional law that you give us this data. That department could turn around and say, well, you could go kick rocks. And then the ASRO office could turn around and say, okay, good luck getting your budget approved next year, or the budget that you guys are looking to get approved. And that's where the power lies, is they've got control, because this was written by the two most powerful committees within the Senate. It has teeth. They cannot give them a runaround and say, oh, sorry, we're not giving you that. It's special access. Okay, fine. Well, just expect next year, and next year's NDAA, your budget's going to get slashed. And then that's where things are going to get
That's where real teeth are. 100%.
That's real teeth. It's got actual power.
It's not since like McCarthyism that we've seen that sort of congressional oversight that can actually go back and enforce what they really want to get done. And I mean, that's been 60 years, 50 years. So that's impressive.
Yeah, it's super impressive. And also, it's a permanent office. It's going to have a legitimate budget. When we were sort of speculating about what the budget for this office would be, $1 billion was thrown in there. Okay. And not every year, but for 2-3 years, if this thing has a $2 to $6 billion budget, I don't think it'll be $6. I think it's going to be closer to like between $1 and $3 billion. That is a legitimate apparatus of the government. You know, that's a serious office. And also what the beautiful thing, and Rep Gallego had mentioned this in an interview on the Hill, is that the office is going to be politically attractive to people who want to move up within the political ladder. It's not going to be a fringe topic anymore. This office legitimizes the topic, and because this office will have access to the most powerful intelligence committees and subcommittees on the Hill, it's now attractive for people who want to do great work and show that they can take a budget and really stretch it and get results. This job, the head of this office, is going to be a very attractive job. And just working in this office is probably going to be the most fun job in all of the intelligence community, because you guys get to look for UAPs all day.
Well, you know, and I think it also speaks to the amount of concern that is prevalent across not just our Congress, but our executive branch, that there are technologies being not just developed, but probably being tested. And actually, we're quite aware of this, that hypersonic that China used a month or two ago now? Mm-hmm. It went, circumnavigated the globe. And we don't currently have anything like our THAAD missiles that are typically a very strong anti-ICBM deterrent would be ineffective in that realm. There are a lot of potential technologies that this office could get their hands on that are easily within the human realm, that would be great advancements for the United States at this point. Just like you mentioned earlier, Mike, cyber warfare, whether it is in cyberspace or it is just technological advancement moving forward, it's going to be huge. And we can only produce so much hardware. We've got to do something more than that.
Right. And if we don't have somebody looking for anomalies, then we're not going to find them. Real quick, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Meat Cutter, $10 dono. Thank you so much, brother. Pissed I can't be here live. I've got to work and pay my own bills. But here's something, boss man. Peace and love to all. Drop that Discord link after parties all the time. Make sure you guys click in the link tree below. We've got a link to our Discord. There's live chats going in there all the time. We're actually working on some potential shows that we might have in there. We're just taking it one step at a time and having a good time with it. Thank you so much, Meat Cutter. We appreciate that.
Can I also add this,
yeah,
Michael? This is a quote from Senator Gillibrand out of the Politico article written by Brian Bender yesterday. And she says, we've not had oversight into this area for a very long time. I can count on one hand the number of hearings I've had in 10 years on this topic. That's fairly concerning, given the experience our service members have had over the last decade.
Wow. That's a big statement.
Like this is the biggest thing to happen since the 2017 New York Times article. And the only reason why it's not getting as much sexy coverage, and it's starting to now, I mean, now we got Politico, the New York magazine just put out something this morning, is because it didn't come with videos.
I think it's bigger than
it's way bigger than that, I think. But once this sucker gets passed, which all indications looks like that's going to happen because it's got bipartisan support in the two most powerful committees on the Hill. So it looks like it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And it may not have the exact verbiage, but it doesn't look like the verbiage of it is going to change much either. So
Frank,
it's
how do you
exciting.
think? Yeah, no, it is. Frank, how do you think this is going to impact the international community? Are they talking about these things in the UK now? Do you believe that this is going to it's going to influence, this amendment is going to influence geopolitics? Like, what's your take on that?
Well, if we're talking about the UK has been pretty lame, compared to some other countries. I think what's going to influence the UK is what happened like with the big phone home. People who actually start engaging with their political representatives on the back of, look at what the Americans are doing. Why is everything still so secret in the UK? Now, obviously, the UK is a very, very secretive state. There's things that I can't talk about. Basically, based on the Official Secrets Act, you walk a much finer line, I think, in the UK system. But the UK is going to, I think, eventually it will follow the American example, being the kind of junior partner in the relationship. But as with any secrets, there are some secrets that are not meant to be made public, and I support those. I get told things that I don't repeat, not classified stuff, but stuff that I think wouldn't be in the interest maybe of the UK or the US, and that shouldn't be out there. So I don't divulge everything that I'm told for that reason. And I think people should manage their expectations kind of accordingly. In that respect, some things are meant to be secrets for a reason. I use a kind of like a submarine analogy. If Elizondo and Davis were a propulsion expert and an expert, for example, on missile systems and sensor systems for submarines, you wouldn't expect them to be talking about like the next gen nuclear attack or nuclear fleet ballistic missile submarines, would you? It just wouldn't. It wouldn't happen.
Right. Well,
hey,
it is.
Frank?
Oh, sorry, Brooks. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, Frank, could you speak on real quick, for us being Americans, I think that you mentioned that some of the information that comes out of the UK would be possibly even a little bit more sensitive than what we deal with. So could you speak very briefly to what the difference between like sovereign data is and classified data from a UK versus US perspective?
Yeah, I don't think it would be more sensitive than what the Americans have. I mean, the military, anything of a military nature, for example, UFOs around sensitive military installations or strategic assets. Yeah, it's going to be highly sensitive, to all countries. But the UK has traditionally had, this kind of blanket kind of secrecy with the Official Secrets Act, and also with these things called D notices that used to be issued to basically to newspaper editors. If they thought that if the UK Ministry of Defence or part of the intelligence apparatus, if they thought that there was going to be something published in a major broadsheet in the UK that was against UK national security interests, then they would issue, a D notice, basically saying, these are against the strategic interests of the United Kingdom. And by and large, it would be woe betide the newspaper editor who didn't heed that and didn't actually, stop publication or alter in a significant way the story that they were going to disseminate.
That's exactly what I was asking for. Yeah, more sensitive was not the right terminology to use, but the difference, I guess, in the way that it gets fielded by the overarching agencies. The U.S. still has, believe it or not, I know that there's some questions, but we still have a little bit more freedom of press than a lot of us think we do, because sovereign data in foreign nations, even very, very progressive nations like the United Kingdom, they will shut it down quickly.
You guys have a lot more freedom of the press than the UK do. But I mean, look, the UK has come a long way. I mean, it released the Project Condon report. It's released a lot of the UFO files. If you look at other countries in Europe, for example, France, Spain, Spain's released a lot of UFO files, a lot of very interesting declassified files from kind of like 1966 to 1997. Released, which were classified secret, not the top secret ones, but some very interesting, concise reports. So I think certain countries are there and ready to do so, but they will follow the American lead. And I think the Rendlesham case is a good example of when the commander of United States Air Force Europe actually came over from Germany to investigate what was going on. And the UK, I think, played a kind of junior role in the investigation. They just allowed the Americans to come and do what they wanted to. And I think that is an example of what we will see going forward, that the Brits will slowly follow the American example.
Well, I wanted to share this real quick because I thought this is cool. The gentlemen over at UAP Media UK have made a template to contact your MP. And so, it's kind of like the Big Phone Home in the UK. So you can download the template letter. And if you're in the UK, you can send a letter to your I don't want to call local state rep, but your MP, your representative in whatever part of the UK you live. And then also yesterday, or not yesterday, a few days ago, there was a senator in Tasmania in Australia who was, I believe, influenced by this Gillibrand amendment, and then started asking the same kind of questions. And it's going to be something that Ross Coulthart's going to be talking about here in his new special that's going to be airing pretty soon, I think this week, if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to get some more information on that. So the ball's starting to roll internationally, and I think it's because of this amendment and the work that we've been doing as well. Like, people want answers, but more importantly, the people within the apparatuses also want answers. They're also curious. They're just as curious as we are. So I think we're in a really prime position to make some noise here in the next year or two.
Yeah, can I just make a point there, guys, about sort of like the secret keeping? I mean, I know a lot of people like, oh, why is the government being secretive, this or that? I mean, if we look back to the 2009 Reid letter, right, when he was trying to get ORSAP turned into a SAP. Okay, so he's saying that the ATIP, as they were calling it, would be of significant interest, if not a top priority, for adversarial foreign intelligence security service. Yeah, and he also talks about protection of industry partnerships and participation is critical. Public awareness of an industry's ATIP affiliation may discourage that industry's further participation with the U.S. government in the program. And then he talks about given that all of these have the potential to be used with catastrophic effect by adversaries, i.e. the technologies, an unusually high degree of operational security and read-on discretion is required. Yeah. Now, sources I talk to, they tell me that there's a huge level of threat from hostile foreign intelligence services directed not just against American aerospace and defense programs, and you can see that in like China's Chengdu fighter, and there are other programs where they try and knock off, or they do knock off American tech, but especially as regards UAP, because this really is the crown jewels. And people have to understand that things are going to be kept behind closed doors. Elizondo and Mellon, people shouldn't think for a moment that they're all about, transparency and disclosure. Yes, they are, I believe, about more transparency for the American people. But they're not about, to divulge like the innermost secrets of America's most advanced and most critical research programs. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, not even close. And I think you bring up an excellent point there when you talk about the the imminent threat of adversarial technology, one of the things, particularly with Australia, the United Kingdom, and ZAC as a whole, right? So Australia, New Zealand, Japan, potentially even Korea, with the growing threat of China's, I don't want to say imperialism, but potential imperialism, I guess. As we watch these alliances strengthen, the sharing of intelligence information is going to continue to grow. And as that happens, I hope to see more technological improvements, whether it's UAP based, whether it's technologies that we've all been working on in silos. Even as you were mentioning before, Frank, like even these small agencies having those large silos around them, it diminishes their ability to develop and produce stronger technologies. So the more information, even if it is in a classified, from a classified standpoint, if it's being shared with individuals who are aware of it and able to handle classified information, then great, I'm all for it, because I think that it's only going to stimulate technological growth for us as a species, and particularly us in one larger alliance.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
Yeah, go
ahead.
Frank. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a very good example is Turkey's expulsion from the F-35 program. Yeah, now Turkey, they've got a burgeoning defense industry. For example, the Turks are very, very advanced now in building drones, as we saw in the recent Armenian-Azerbaijan war. The Turks were expelled from the F-35 program. Why? Because they went ahead with buying S-400 surface-to-air missiles from Russia, and the Americans basically said, "Sorry, but you can't do that. It's incompatible with our sharing our kind of some of our most advanced secrets with you." So while Britain, Norway, Italy, other countries, South Korea, Japan are going to be getting this kind of technology, like the Turkey won't now. So there is an ever-present threat from foreign hostile intelligence services, and if allies don't toe the line, then the Americans won't share with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's such
We're looking at you,
Erdogan. Yeah, so from a risk analysis standpoint, I mean, Brooks brought up an important point about China and their growing potential imperialism. You've got potentially significant threats coming from new technology that the Chinese are developing. What do you make of the risk assessment of this of UAP? I mean, it's a very difficult thing, right? So we can talk about drones, but let's focus on UAP right now and the other bucket, whatever that other bucket is. What is your consideration for how that should be judged from a risk assessment perspective for both Western alliances and the United States?
Are you talking in terms of like the potential threat posed by intelligences behind UAP? Is that what you're asking?
Either a potential threat behind those intelligences or potential threat of reverse engineering advanced, or as you put it, post-quantum technology.
Yeah, well, there's a threat of the Russians and the Chinese doing that, certainly, and there's good reason to believe that the Russians are pretty far ahead with that, based on, for example, Project Condon talks about the Russian interest. That was back in 1999, 2000, talking about the Russian interest in UAP. George Knapp and Fred 3 talking about the Russian interest in UAP. The Russians certainly considered the intelligence behind UAP to be a threat, and they actually lost aircraft. China, I believe, from what I understand, from the limited information that's come out, they're probably less far ahead than Russia and the US. As I've stated before, they're still having problems with engines, right, for their 5th generation kind of stealth jets. So they're not true 5th generation jets because they're still using like kind of 1980s era jets, which are knockoffs of Russian engines. But China is, in my opinion, more of a threat than the former Soviet Union ever was, because they have had the last kind of, when did I start looking at this? I started looking at this in about 1997, about the Chinese penetration of American universities and technology companies. Chinese, basically, by using kind of more open market practices in a way that the former Soviet Union never had access to, they've been able to access American technology and universities on top of all the espionage that they've been carrying out. And they've got much more money than the former Soviet Union ever had to do it. So they're technologically advancing very, very rapidly, and they've got the money to continue to do so. In terms of the threat from unexplained, the intelligences behind unexplained aerial phenomena, I believe, yes, there is a threat beyond, the sort of, air collision and air navigation threats. Anything that can enter your airspace. There was actually, in Project Condon, there was actually an interesting criteria. This is a British report written by Defence Intelligence 55 in 1999. Defence Intelligence 55 was that part of the UK Defence Intelligence staff that looked at kind of like, the UFO problem effectively. And Defence Intelligence 55 was asking, well, do these craft pose a threat to the UK? Can they enter, undetected by radar? Could they enter and leave, having acquired intelligence through signals intelligence or electronic intelligence? So I think that if we apply that to the American situation or any global situation, yes, UAP can do that. Have they displayed hostile intent? I'd argue yes. In Calares, Brazil, 1977, they certainly did. The Brazilian Air Force Intelligence, Brazilian Naval Intelligence, and also the Brazilian National Intelligence Service at the time considered them to be a threat. So, Brazil is a military player, was at the time and is now, and they consider it to be a threat. We don't have access to maybe cases where UAP have caused the deaths deliberately of, say, American or British pilots. But I've spoken to American veterans who say that they have. So, I keep an open mind to that. They can definitely, the UAP, the intelligence behind them, can definitely pose a threat if they want to. And as a former intelligence officer, I find it very, very alarming that they are not only able to penetrate airspace with impunity, outpace, the most sophisticated aircraft that, the UK, the United States have, that our allies have, but that they can manipulate people's perceptions. They can, initiate nukes. They can shut down nukes. I find that incredibly disturbing. And whether you think that they're benign or whether you think that it's not benign, the fact is that their capability to do that, and I say they because I don't know who they are or where they come from, but their ability to do that is indicative of a highly unequal relationship in terms of UAP intelligences and humans. It's a highly unequal relationship and not something that I personally want to be in.
Go ahead, Brooks.
So I heard you just say initiate nukes and shut down nukes, and that's a giant question for me. Is this something that we've seen? Is this information that's been corroborated?
Well, it's a case from, we've seen the shutting down nukes in the US, and that's been fairly well documented. And then there's the case from the former Soviet Union where they actually started a launch sequence. I think it was in 1982 or 1983, which had the Soviets panicking Big Star. So yeah, and also I spoke to Bob Salas, and this is another thing that's disturbing. I interviewed him earlier this year, just a little private interview between us, and he said that one of his technical sergeants who was trying to get the nukes back up and running and was actually in the silo, like fiddling around with the systems. He said that he had some kind of he was affected in some way by the UAP, that, he had a kind of feeling like everything was going to be okay, that, it wasn't a threat. But, that's a kind of, that's affecting euphoria. People's perceptions. Yeah, that's kind of, that's slide 9, isn't it? So I find those things disturbing if they can do that. Now, I'm not saying that they are a threat, but there seem to be quite a few different theys out there based on the different types of craft, maybe. So,
yeah, definitely
the jury's out on that one.
Not wanting to be on the minority end of that technological reservoir, right?
No, and the military are there to basically hope for the best but prepare for the worst. Yeah. So I think it would be incredibly naive and incredibly unprofessional for the military not to take this extremely seriously.
I do agree with that. They are. Regardless of who the they is, I absolutely agree with that statement.
Well, I think that's part of the angle of Christopher Mellon. Sorry, Michael, to cut you off. Is that I think this is why we got to the Gillibrand Amendment, was because of these nuclear issues. Robert Salas just did and I would check it out, Brooks, if you haven't already. He just did a discussion at the National Press Club, where him and his colleagues that served during the Cold War had, I think it was 15 ICBMs shut down all at once at the same time, while his guards upstairs are telling him that there was a huge red bright light in the sky shooting beams into the ground. It's absolutely insane. And one by one, these missiles start shutting down. And then in a more sort of newer era, you've got these crafts showing up over our most sensitive nuclear bases, and they're showing up over our nuclear warcraft, and they're just sitting there for days at a time, and nobody is talking about it or looking at it or saying, okay, we need to really, even though it doesn't pose a threat and there are other things in the world going on that need our attention, we can't ignore this anymore. And that's what's in the bill. This has gotten to a point where it's unignorable. And so that's, I think, the nuclear aspect of this discussion is probably the most, it's the thing, it's the catalyst, I believe, that set all of this into motion. Sorry, Michael.
That makes sense. Go ahead, Michael.
No, good. Well, I was just going to say, Campbell Moriera writes the FOIA documents about the Robert Salas event in the 60s says it was an electromagnetic event that could conceptually be interpreted to mean UAP. They brought Boeing in to install EMF filters. Yeah, and I know Robert Salas has been man, I'm gonna be the asshole in the room. This is the challenge, right? Because you have somebody like Robert Salas who's also said he's been abducted, in his own, by his own admission, in his own book, which could be true, could not be true. I'm not here to make a statement or a judgment on whether or not he is telling the truth, but it always makes it more difficult, right? It always makes it more difficult to believe somebody when they say something like that, when he's saying that he was abducted by aliens. He was also injected with something. So, but the event, there are events that happened that were actually FOIA'd that we know of, and as Campbell says, they were considered electromagnetic events. Now, what were those specifically? Craft shooting down lasers, and like, can we trust that? And that, like, can we trust that as fact, or do we need to be skeptical here, gentlemen?
I think it's tough, right? I think it's we have to be cautious with it. I understand what you're saying, Michael, but at the same time, I also say to myself, well, this man had a button. He had the key to turn. He was in charge of pressing the button if we were attacked by the Russians during the Cold War. That is a massive responsibility, and they don't just give that to anyone. So that's where I have problems with it. But at the same time, and somebody, I think, proposed this to Robert Salas to his face and to a group of people, and it did not make them happy. But if the United States, say, was developing a tech that was able to shut down nuclear weapons, and that would be pretty handy during the Cold War.
Test on yourself first.
That's exactly right. You would test it on yourself first, and to see, because if it works against your equipment, there's no doubt it's going to work against the Russians. Because
that's typical Red Hat. There's nothing surprising about that at all. And you wouldn't tell the people that you're testing because they're going to be prepared for it. I think the other thing that goes along with that, though, just to play devil's advocate here, I think it's an excellent point to bring up that you don't just trust anyone with the football, with the key to launch the nukes. However, just thinking about it, if you have to go to sleep every night knowing that that's what's on your shoulders, it's entirely possible that you may, how do I put this gently?
Develop psychological.
That's a very nice way to put it. Yes, Michael.
Yeah. And that's understandable, but it's tough.
And again, that's not to state that he wasn't abducted. I'm just,
Yeah, but I mean, when you pitch that to Robert Salas,
he'll drop an elbow on your face.
He'll drop an elbow on your face. I mean, he's look, but Robert Salas isn't the only veteran that echoes this frustration, and that's kind of where I want to at least give Robert Salas the benefit of the doubt. Because
and I'm not questioning it, right?
Yeah, no. I know you're not. I'm just, like, for me personally, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because he's not the only serviceman that has this issue. And in Gillibrand's quotes in the Political article, and I'm paraphrasing, But this is the amount of reports that they've gotten from servicemen and servicewomen within the apparatus has been overwhelming. And a lot of them, especially when you look at someone like Kevin Day and some other folks, you could see the stress and the anger that has been building for years and years and years, because they've been written off, they've been ridiculed, they didn't get the promotion, they lost their pension, whatever the thing is, medical records being hidden to a point where it took a sitting senator to get your medical records cleared so you can have a surgery. Like, those things are real. That anger is tangible, and I can't just brush that all with, well, maybe they're just really stressed and having psychological issues.
Even if they are, I don't think that's a brush off, or it shouldn't be, right? I think that even if we are aware that that's a possibility, that only calls into question how much we should take at face value, not that it should be written off, right? That's the ad hominem attack right there that goes back to the beginning of the episode. Even if they're under that much stress, even if they are dealing with psychological issues because of the burden of their position, that does not mean that the experiences that they had are untrue.
Right.
Frank,
I think, guys, a key point that Dr. Bob McGuire made the other day was the fact that Captain Bob Salas, he wasn't taken off the job after he had that experience, right, in the silo. And I talked to Bob Salas, and I said, even having had that experience, and even, because he kind of believes that it was a sort of a message from others saying, effectively communicating that we shouldn't be playing with nukes, we shouldn't be playing with fire. And I said, but would you still have launched nukes then if you were given the order? And he said, yeah, of course. He goes, I'm an Air Force officer, I would have done. I just wanted to run through quickly, if we're talking about threat, I just actually found it from the UK's Project Condon, which was a secret report written on UAP. So they said, they gave various criteria for whether the Brits would consider UAP to be a threat. And they said, if unidentified air objects could successfully penetrate the defended airspace with hostile intent in peace, crisis, or war, damage or potential damage or danger could be caused in the form of physical effects, electronic effects, or if there's possibility of an air hazard, such as a collision or damaging incident with civil or military air traffic. Another one was objects within the airspace were found to be hostile if challenged and invulnerable to radar tracking and could outmaneuver our airborne or ground-based air defenses, so talk missiles and fighters. And then the last one was controlled objects could enter and leave the UK air defense region, having possibly obtained intelligence data, e.g. imagery, electronic intelligence, etc. So that was written like 1999. So those criteria for, do these objects present a threat? You could say, well, yeah, they do. They're doing that.
Yeah, sounds like it. Let me ask you this, Frank. So this was the Condon report, and this was ultimately released to the public. Is that correct? Was this? I'm curious how this was released with the sensitive nature of this report.
Yeah, it was written. I think they started researching it. I think 1998. It was released, I think, in 2000 to the Defense Intelligence Staff, and then 2006, I believe, it was released to the public. But I was actually reading through it in detail again the other day, because there's so much in there, and you're always getting more stuff out of it. I was reading through it, and I actually said that there's a recommendation that certain parts of the report should be redacted and released to the public to try and kind of damp down interest in the UFO issue. I think actually my impression was that the Brits were just desperate to get away from people phoning them up all the time with reports, and because you'd have your fair share of crazies as well. But I think that the Brits, they just didn't have enough evidence at that level to decide whether it was a threat or not. And overall, the report says that it's of no intelligence interest. As in, it's not a threat. But then again, they go on to list like, but it's got like lots of technological advantages which could accrue by, mastery of the technologies that we've seen. So it's very interesting. And it was saying
outmaneuvering any known aircraft or missile, either manned or unmanned. How could that not be a threat? Like, that is the most horrifying thing you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, and also they're telling pilots to say on no account should pilots attempt to intercept UAP. If you see UAP, you should point yourself in the other direction and split. And sorry, I was just going to say in the report as well, when it was talking about the Russians, and just let me pull it up. Yeah. So, and this is in Condon as well. So they're quoting Defense Intelligence 55 are quoting Marshal Sokolov, who was the Minister of Defense of the Soviet Union in the 1980s. And Sokolov says, we had 40 cases where pilots encountered UFOs. When our pilots would engage the UFO, it would speed up, our aircraft would give chase, lose control and crash. That happened 3 times, and twice the pilots died. The pilots viewed UFOs as a definite threat. And then it says the military were interested, as the Russians, the military were interested in UFOs, including the belief that if some of the secrets of the UFO could be properly understood, they would be able to win the competition against prospective enemies by incorporating the technology. So that's 1989, 2000. Talking about, the Russians earlier in the 1980s. So my takeaway from that is really, if you read between the lines, if the Russians, who were the Soviets, who were the major adversarial power, right, against the Brits at that time, always trying to get into the UK air defense zone. If they considered UAP to be a threat, then the Brits would definitely have considered UAP to be a threat as well. That's just my takeaway.
I agree. Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to.
There's no way. And it's fascinating to me because when you particularly consider the geographic size of Russia, and how much airspace they have that they need to maintain, that would be a great place. If I'm some foreign entity that has nothing to do with Earth, and I want to try to subtly create an aerial reconnaissance plan of some sort, the Arctic, particularly because we have so many large nations that butt up against the Arctic but don't really have sovereign airspace there, plus Siberia, that's kind of my target. If thinking from that perspective. And so the Russians would be touched a lot of that area.
Yeah, Paul Stonehouse, is it Paul Stonehouse? That great researcher who does a lot of stuff on the internet, and he's a Russian speaker, but he's talking about he's always pushing out stuff about what's going on in the lakes and Russia and the remote regions, as you said, and the other area was like around the Kamchatka Peninsula and in the kind of like the Mariana Trench area and up by the Kuril Islands, all these kind of deep water areas and really remote areas. So yeah, I mean, Russia's got it's so massive with so many remote areas and a lot of big stretches of water.
Yeah, because Lake Baikal is the deepest lake in the entire world. And then the Marianas Trench, obviously, being the deepest water source, period. But I mean, all of the Pacific, besides some small island nations. So it would be like the Arctic, moving around the perimeter of the Arctic for the nations there. And then the South Pacific and Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, that area.
Yeah, there's a very good documentary which I think was from the 80s or the 90s, but it's got Russian submariners basically and former Soviet submariners talking about their experiences with USOs and saying that they lost submarines and that the Americans lost submarines too with these very fast underwater objects.
Well, this is something I'm curious to know, Frank, if you've ever seen this. Lee Spiegel shared this with me, and I thought this was...
Can you zoom in on that?
Yeah, I'm going to zoom on it right now for you guys. So it's called the Introductory Space Science Volume 2, Department of Physics. Sorry, hold on. There we go. It's edited by Major Donald G. Carpenter and co-editor Lieutenant Colonel Edward Thurkelson. And this was a part of the Air Force training manual in 1966.
I love how it starts. What is an unidentified flying object? Well, glad you asked. No.
Yeah, basically.
That's what it was. It's the 60s, though. It's the 60s.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, man. This is a really, really, really cool document. And I'm curious. I'm wondering if Frank, have you ever gotten a chance to read this?
I think I may have done, but I can't remember when. Could you post a link to it after on the show?
Yeah, I can send you an email. It's a file. There's no link for it.
Fantastic.
At least not that I know of, and I just don't know how. I wouldn't even know where to put a file like this. I mean,
it definitely rings a bell.
Discord, right? Can I put
it definitely rings a bell.
Yeah, we
put it on a Google Drive.
But this this goes into the effects, the shapes, the histories, the colors, the luminosity of these objects. It goes into operational domains, temporal and spatial. But I mean, all of these effects from UAP that they had.
Wait, what's the smell? I'll go back. Go back down a little bit.
Okay, so you got
ozone or other
order. These are the associated effects. I mean, it really breaks it down into some really, really cool things. And basically what I took away from it was, and I think this is 10 pages. There's a lot.
When did this get declassified? Any idea?
This was put out in public by Lee Spiegel in the, I want to say, mid 2000s, early 2000s. And it wasn't something that was classified. It was just an Air Force training manual that they found.
No one really brought it up.
And
interesting.
They found this chapter in it. And this is around the time of Project Blue Book. And so basically what I gathered from this is that as you're going through training, they get to this section of UFOs and they give you in here, it tells you the Air Force tells you what happens to you if you report these things. So this is essentially 13 pages telling you what the hell's going on. So that way, when you see one in service, you don't report it because you've already got the answers on it. You don't need, there's no curiosity. I mean, dude, this is, and the only thing that I haven't done, just because I haven't had the time.
Does it say in there, don't bother reporting it?
It does. It doesn't say don't bother reporting it. It tells you the ramifications of you reporting it. So you're going to get demoted. You're going to possibly lose your wings if you're a pilot, things like that. Because they don't want crazies talking about this stuff in the Air Force. And so I think what happens, and this is how this information stuck, is it was very simple. Give them the answers. And they won't talk about it if they see it because they already know how it moves, how it works, where it comes from. Not where it comes from. They don't have a plan.
But go back. Go to the part where it says the theories of what is it? Some theories as to the nature of the UFO phenomenon: mysticism, hoaxes and rantings due to unstable personalities, secret weapons, natural phenomenon, alien visitors. It's like bam, like right in your face. Like
so this is 1966.
Mm-hmm.
Around about that time, there is this beautiful little craft called the SR-71 Blackbird that exists, that no one really wants to acknowledge exists, and probably meets, and again, I've not read this whole document, but I would be willing to guess, probably meets several of the explanation patterns of this. So do you think, and this is, I want your guys' opinion here, do you think that this is hey, what you just saw was a classified experiment, keep your mouth shut? Or do you think this is really a preemptive opportunity to stop pilots from discussing what I would call true UAPs, from the sense of the U.S. federal government not knowing what they are?
I think it's the latter, personally. Because, I mean, it talks about a carving that they found in China. That's
good propaganda right there.
Like 90,000.
I mean, that's the other possibility.
Well, that's why I want to find out more about the authors and the lieutenants that wrote this, because I'm curious to know what other sort of Air Force manuals they wrote. But I mean, these ground disturbance, radiation, inhibition of voluntary movement by observers, these are not descriptions of the SR-71 platform.
No, they're not. But I mean, so not to pretend like I'm Goebbels, but if I'm writing propaganda to get you to not talk about something I know about, obviously I'm going to add in some additional fabricated information, so that it's not super clear that I'm pinpointing one thing. That's not to say that you're not right. I'm playing devil's advocate again. But I think the 60s and the 70s was a very unique time for the United States. We were in a very precarious position, operating against an adversary in the Soviet Union that was spending almost as much as we were on war, even though they didn't have the food to feed their or the money to feed their population. But they certainly were trying.
Right. No, and also I agree with you in that the amount of trust that the American military apparatus had at that point was way high. I mean, we had just won World War II, and we're just sort of slipping into fighting, communism and the Russians, and that went great up until about just before Vietnam and Iran, and
it's really Vietnam.
Things.
Yeah, it's really Vietnam. You're correct. You can even pinpoint, go back to Eisenhower, who came out of World War II, a decorated general, a future president, and then went on to say that, one of America's biggest concerns moving forward is going to be the military-industrial complex. He acknowledged it himself as part of it, that we have to be cognizant of our bias. Right. That war is not the only solution for us, and military spending is certainly not.
Frank, I know you have a point you want to make, but I just gotta say quickly, Fifi, just hilarious. In Soviet Russia, aliens get abducted.
Alien.
Frank, you had a point?
No, I was just going to say, I actually located that file. I have read it. I was just looking through, and funnily enough, it was in a folder that says U.S. Air Force. So
there you go.
I just can't see it. It's introductory space science, but there's no classification on it, is there? But it's still very, very interesting. Very, very interesting.
I mean, it's kind of nice again. The references. I'm going to send it to you, Michael. You're going to get a kick out of this. When I read it, I was like, okay, this is crazy. And then when we started talking about it on Discord, a lot of things that you guys were saying were sort of being brought up. I was like, okay, yeah, that does make sense. I could see how the Air Force can concoct a chapter like this to even throw off their own guys as to, but I think it also, even if it is that, I think there is an element of this document that is telling their own people, shut the hell up about anything you see anywhere. I don't care what it is. And if we got to make up some answer to give them to satisfy their curiosity so they shut the hell up, let's do that.
Well, and if anything that we're seeing today versus 1966 is we're seeing that finally being turned around on its head. Like if you've got this Gillibrand amendment on the table, if you have people who are actively saying you will lose funding if you don't report these things, do you guys think that if drones weren't a significant threat and this new this new sort of espionage weren't a threat, do you think we'd be seeing this? Or do you think it's because of the fear of drone threats that we're actually taking anomalous aircraft
I think it's all
anomalous
of it.
Objects?
It's all of it, man.
I agree.
It's the drones. It's the nuclear problem we talked about earlier. But
hypersonics are going to be a terrifying proposition. I mean, that's a huge thing. And real quick, as we'll come right back to this, but I did want to say, Luis, because I think you bring up an excellent point too. Whether it was to indoctrinate us to not talk about our own stuff, but could you imagine the fear that would be brought out if something Russian was so incredibly powerful that it could intervene in our airspace and we can't do anything about it, and people were made aware that they had that technology? So, I mean, just like you don't necessarily want the enemy to know what you have, you don't want your people to know how powerful the enemy is either, right? So it's both sides of that. Yeah. And Mike, to finish answering your question, I think that we're at the point now where we know in the next 15 years or so, there is going to be another major showdown on planet Earth. And it may not come to an all-out war, but there will be a major, it's an arms race. We're in an arms race again. We are.
Yeah. But it's also, it's gone exopolitical.
What do you guys make of the Silk Road or the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese? Like, do you think this is a big part of their overarching strategy when it comes to imperialism? Like, is this where we're headed?
To me, it reminds me of the Schacht plan in 1930s Germany. Hjalmar Schacht was the German economic minister, and he basically engendered a kind of economic dependence of countries on Nazi Germany's periphery. Which is as a prelude to sort of German domination of those countries. So yeah, I see some people compare China to sort of Wilhelmine Germany in the 1890s.
Do you think that's fair? Like you said, is that something that you take seriously? Because if that's something that is so potentially I mean, that's a big statement. Is that something that you feel strongly about?
Very, very much so, yeah. And I mean, reading the DoD report on China military power to Congress from last year, which I quoted from in my first paper, and I just actually finished reading the DoD report on Chinese military power that came out earlier this month. By 2049, China wants to be the preeminent military, economic, and technological power in the world. And if that's displacing the Americans, who they see as in a period of relative decline, then they're going to do so. They've made very clearly that part of that kind of, they call it a national rejuvenation. Part of that national rejuvenation involves, reuniting the various parts of the country. So they've got Hong Kong back, and they will reunite with
Taiwan.
Okay, and that's where you've got the trigger point coming in. As soon as China, and we've seen them, with major kind of incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone and air defense region, then once they will get to a point where they feel confident about A, invading Taiwan, and B, being able to provide anti-access area denial against the Americans and their allies. And once that happens, then it's going to be a big showdown. And that's what they've been planning for, and that's what they've been re-equipping for, and that's what they've been developing their technology for. And if you look at all the declassified reports the last 3 decades, that's what they've been doing.
Right. And in addition to that, when you look at the social nature of their state, I mean, it is very much a social police state.
Police state, yes.
Yeah, and then we're also looking at, we're looking at they have internment camps now, right now. The Uyghurs are in internment, and like this is powerful stuff because anybody who disagrees with the Chinese state, who's within their borders, if as they continue to push the Belt and Road Initiative, potentially we could see more and more of this, in not just against Muslims, but against others as well.
Well, one of the things that we're going to see happen because of the fact that they are a social police state, as well as their inability to acknowledge their own fascist nature, and they want to continue to pretend to be the People's Republic of China. They don't have large allies. They really don't. At this point in time, Russia even, I think, would probably kind of go laissez-faire if they really tried to engage with the Western powers. Japan has really started to. Frank, did you have something to say to that?
No. I was just turning off. I did put on no notifications, but I got a phone call.
Gotcha. So I mean, Japan is realigning or retying military, and so this is a funny headline. Germany sent their first military ship to Japan, and the first time in the past 40 years. So the Germans and the Japanese are huge allies again. Terrifying stuff if you want to make bad jokes. But really and truly, the EU, Japan, South Korea, ANZAC, so that's going to be Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Canada, most of the Commonwealth of the United Kingdom, are all prepared to move against China, and China doesn't have large allies outside of themselves. Again, Russia would be the closest, and their alliance is out of a communal dislike for the United States.
That's interesting. What about they have no Middle Eastern allies?
Well, I mean, maybe don't subjugate Muslims.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, but then again, but then again, despite that, they've made big inroads in places like Syria. They've made inroads with regimes like Egypt. Egypt actually sent back a load of Uyghur Muslims who were studying at a religious school at the Al-Aram University, which is like one of their sort of most prestigious Islamic school. They sent them back to China.
I thought they were in Islamic State. I thought Turkey was in Islamic State.
Yeah,
no,
yeah, they are. But Chinese investment is more important to them than the rights of Muslims. And also as well, Turkey turns a blind eye to what its ethnic brethren, to what's happening to them in China as well.
Well, and that's an excellent point, and I think that relates back to the Belt and Road Initiative, because the more financial tendrils that the Chinese have, even if they're not making friends, they may very well have economic jurisdiction to get things done that they want done, regardless of their allyship.
And that's where a large Western alliance goes: drop them, send us whatever secrets you have, and we'll do our best to pay off your debt after we're done with China. That being said, though, Turkey is not a Muslim state. They are absolutely a secular nation. When Ataturk recreated Turkey, the institution, and this is why I'm so frustrated frequently with Erdogan, is because he votes like they are a Muslim nation, and they are not. They are a secular state. They're part of NATO, or were part of it. Oh, they're still part of NATO, but they are no longer part of some of our war programs because of the decisions they've made.
Yeah, but I'd argue that he's been rolling that back with friendship towards the support of the Muslim Brotherhood, and also as well his policy. I say he's very much kind of like Islamic in outlook.
He's
rolling.
He's not following it at all. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I'd say he's rolling it back, and it's very, very, very kind of dangerous for the rest of the world, or certainly for regional states.
Well, do you think the Chinese economy will make it that long to make a move of that nature? From my understanding,
they're only gaining power.
Well, no,
they are, but the issue is that as soon as China no longer has customers to sell stuff to, their economy diminishes. Is that your point, Luis?
Yeah, that's my point also, but they've also had a huge expansion in real estate that can't be bought. It's sort of the house of cards that happened here in the United States, where it's just this huge expansion and boom, real estate boom. And it's all of these overpriced homes that nobody in this nation can afford. And they're, the loans on those homes are starting to come due. So
you're talking about like Seattle, Vancouver, like those regions, or are you talking about in China itself?
I'm talking about in China itself.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree. They just had one of their major real estate players, because they've had a kind of very speculative economy.
Second largest real estate developer in the world.
Right.
Yeah, and we're talking about 200 billion in kind of liabilities that it had, $200 billion in liabilities, and that had the ability to kind of shake, I think it's 2% of the Chinese economy, and that's a dangerous thing. That if you have a major economic shock in China, coupled with a historical sense of grievance against, the colonization of China and Western imperialism, and on top of that, a very popular kind of nationalism, which is for the party to push China to regain its rightful place in the world. That resonates with a lot of people, so it's extremely dangerous. If they have a shock, then, and also as well, the Chinese Communist Party has promised to deliver Taiwan effectively as part of the national rejuvenation. Sorry, my phone's all over the place.
Sorry, that window is closing, and I think you make a great point, Frank. So we've got two big issues. One, the second largest real estate development company in the world was Chinese, and it had essentially just, correct me if I'm wrong, they did declare bankruptcy, right? Like they essentially had to waive their debt because they were not they were illiquid, essentially.
Who?
I can't remember the name of the firm, but they were the second largest real estate development in the world, and they were a Chinese firm. Okay. And they had to determine themselves illiquid. On top of that, you also have mandates from the Chinese government to pull money out of certain industries. I mean, look at the war against Jack Ma and Alibaba. Look at the war against Tencent, which is a gaming company in China, and they just actually changed the laws so that kids, I think up until the age of 18, can only play video games on Fridays between, I'm going to get the hours wrong, but it's like 7 to 9 p.m.
I think it's like an hour a week. Yeah.
It's wild. So, I mean, if you're an external investor to Chinese companies, it's very, very volatile right now. And that's actually counterintuitive to the giant economic growth we've seen over the past few years. And so I think that window is closing. And yes, delivering Taiwan is part of the plan, but if they can't do it soon, I don't know. I don't see what the path forward looks like. And my other thought process, and I could be wrong about this, but I do think that if Xi Jinping leaves office, passes away, whatever may happen to him, I don't know that they're going to get a leader that follows him that is able to do what he's done for the nation.
This is the challenge, right? And I always come back to this because, as Westerners, we believe in democracy to our cores. I certainly do. Never in my life do I want to live in a place that has an authoritarian dictator. However, it should be recognized that having an authoritarian dictator gives you a long view. It allows you to play the long game. And you make a good point, Brooks, about yes, that's the thing. if he dies, will anybody be able to have the vision that he has to play that long game? But if he lays out the plan well enough, why wouldn't they?
But you can say the same thing about Russia. I mean, look at post-Stalin Soviet Union. The USSR, after Stalin died, had so much momentum that, yes, they kept moving forward, but I don't know that Khrushchev or Gorbachev or anyone else Brezhnev was able to continue the momentum or even grow it from what Stalin had encompassed.
I mean, Putin's getting pretty close, isn't he?
It's a different kind of thing. I mean, he's got that wonderful cult of personality. Like, people love Putin and people hate Putin, but ultimately the Russian economy is fucking shit.
Yeah.
Like, I'm impressed that they have two nickels to rub together at this point.
California is richer than Russia.
That is correct.
Much.
I did not know that.
I think with the scary thing with China, as I said, is if they do manage to contain their internal problems, and they've got massive disparities. They've got something like in wealth, they've got something like 300 million people, like transient workers, who are basically just like skivvies. Basically, they just move from place to place, doing the most menial jobs, the most dangerous construction work.
It's basically slave labor.
Yeah, they're living, hand to mouth. It's subsistence living. So they've got massive disparities. But I think if the Chinese, they're playing the long game, as they have since Deng Xiaoping, which is not to provoke a major confrontation with the United States until they're ready. But all the reports that I've looked at, if you look over the last 30 years, the Chinese got a massive shock when they saw the Americans rolling through Iraq in the first Gulf War, and they spent all that time since 1991 playing catch up, and they had a great opportunity while the Americans and their allies were engaged in counterinsurgency in Afghanistan to catch up in some key areas. And I don't think they're going to provoke a confrontation until they're sure of A, being able to invade Taiwan, and B, being able to impose unacceptable cost on the Americans for trying to intervene. But when that happens, that means American deterrence has failed.
Well, but Frank, you also made an excellent point. Is we talk about the ability to strike that kind of or create that sort of a scenario in which we can't strike the way we'd like to. Their aircraft, as you said, are 40 years behind us in terms of their engine structure. I mean, and again, their missile scientists are pretty good. Their fire control is not bad, but yeah, air superiority is going to be ours. They don't have the aircraft carriers that we do. I don't know that on a naval perspective, the Chinese have anything comparable. And you may know far more than I do, but from my perspective, that's what I see.
Yeah, I mean, they've got some pretty capable surface platforms that are, as probably as good as some of the American ones, the older ones. And they only have to win in the South China Sea, right? And winning for them means imposing unacceptable costs. One scenario that's been put forward that I've heard, if they were directly threatening Taiwan with an invasion, maybe they would use, for example, like a tactical nuke on somewhere like Guam. Now, that's not the American mainland, but it's still a pretty strong message. If you intervene, this is such an important issue to us that we're willing to go to use nukes. And would the Americans then risk a strike on, say, Australia or on Japan, because the Chinese have threatened to nuke Japan, or on the American mainland? Would the Americans trade Chicago or New York for Taiwan? Is what I'm.
No, but they can't hit Chicago or New York. They can't hit Chicago or New York at this point in time. And I think a tactical strike on Guam basically opens up Shanghai and Beijing as targets. And that's not something they're willing to do, because we can put nuclear submarines closer to them than they could ever get an ICBM close to us.
Yeah, but I mean, are you willing to take that choice? I'm not so sure.
I'm not, but I also don't think the Chinese would do Guam. That's my point. I think that they are well aware of the risk that they impose themselves.
It's mutual destruction.
It is. It's mutual destruction.
I hope so. I seriously hope so.
But even without that, I think it's economic destruction. If they were to nuke Guam and we backed off, the rest of the world shuts China down. China's only as good as their export market.
I agree. I think if the Chinese had nuked Guam and we just went just like this, what are you guys going to do about it? I think the rest of the world would kick in. You wouldn't need the United States. Honestly, I don't think you would. It would piss off so many other countries and so many other of the Five Eyes that it would be immediately condoned, and I think there would be major ramifications on their economy.
That might actually be the best thing they could do for us.
I think so. I think
the question is who who would stand up to China if not the United States?
Well, it would be us,
Everyone
but we
else.
wouldn't do it militaristically. We do it economically, and so would the EU. And I think that
Well,
the Middle East would, Saudi Arabia and company.
All I'll say, guys, is they're investing pretty heavily in an invading Taiwan scenario for a country that maybe won't do it. They're investing a lot of money.
Well, no, they very well may do it. They just may not do it with hot war, right? They may not do it with nuclear weapons, but they certainly are aiming to do it. I don't disagree at all. I think that is their goal, and that's what they're building towards.
And I personally think that what it's going to come down to is it's going to be a game of risk, and it's going to end up not even being on the shoulders of the United States. I think it's going to be how much Japan, Korea, the Philippines, Singapore, nations like that are willing to commit.
India.
Because if those nations, if those nations are willing to commit and have U.S. backup, China's going to have to back off.
Yeah.
Right. But if it's not done in some sort of nuclear way, it would be insane, because that you're going to have some serious kickback from the rest of the world. But if they're willing to do it slowly and they're willing to do it, take one little piece at a time and get in and ultimately take Taiwan, then who is the U.S. willing to shut down the Chinese export market if they're not doing something drastic or catastrophic?
I think we have to be. Because it sets a precedent. Hong Kong set a precedent that we should not have ever accepted. And I think Taiwan would set a precedent that not only the United States, the entire EU, all of the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, all of them have to stand up and say, listen, we have interests in that part of the world. And if you're going to invade, even if it's through assimilation, invade our trading partners, then fuck off.
Yeah, we're gonna have a problem. Yeah, but it does go back. The one thing that interesting, just sort of circle back to UAP here real quick, is that you were mentioning the capabilities of Russia and China from and this is why I don't understand war, because to get a congressional approval of war, it has to be an imminent threat, and the United States hasn't faced an imminent threat since the British invasion or Pearl Harbor.
We also haven't got a congressional approval for war, so
right, exactly. But it's this idea that I really don't fear these countries from a militaristic standpoint. I kind of fear them from a digital footprint standpoint, in terms of like they could hack us. I think that is very, very, like, if they could hack our nuclear capabilities and missile systems and those ships and boats and set off something here in the US that would affect those systems, say take out a couple satellites. I think this is why we're getting a Space Force. I think that could, if they decided, you know what, we're going to take this risk, we're going to invade Taiwan, we're also going to take out this capability of them to be able to communicate with each other, and maybe it takes them a year or two to fix it. I could see how that could be a pretty messy situation. But what I was originally going to say was, this idea that they're 40 years behind from an Air Force perspective, or, their aircraft carriers are.
That was a singular part for an aircraft. It's not the whole aircraft thing, but yeah.
But what I'm saying is they don't have the capability of launching an imminent threat against the United States. Not one of these nations, not one of them.
Absolutely, that's absolutely true. There's no Red Dawn. That's never going to happen. And to Patrick's point, when did China invade Tibet?
It was 1953, wasn't it?
It wasn't really an invasion at that point. It was essentially just Mao going, "Hey, Tibet's ours." Tibet going, "Yeah, okay."
One of the Red Army walked in.
They did,
yeah.
But it was
an invasion.
Uncontested. It's not the same thing as what happened in Hong Kong,
right?
And it's certainly not going to be what happens in Taiwan. But Luis, you make an interesting point, right? So from a cyber warfare perspective, the ability to take over nukes is terrifying, but it's visible. What's more terrifying is if a foreign adversary could cause the Hoover Dam to tear itself apart, or some of our larger, more visible wind projects, solar projects to just fail. That kind of thing is, in the long run, a lot more devastating than what would be an act of war. And that's where I think
sanitation systems to shut down.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. Essentially a fire sale, right?
Right.
Or, oil pipelines to shut down, stop pumping oil.
The thing that really sort of frightens me is I always think of the DC shooter or the Boston shooters, where an entire states were shut down just to catch one guy who was randomly doing stuff. So it's very difficult to sort of predict what was going to happen next. And I think that the drone tech, the swarm drone tech, has a capability of causing a lot of panic and chaos within the United States. And then that could spiral. I'm more worried about stuff like that spiraling the trust in the system out of control to a point where you start getting, factions within the United States to protect their own cities and towns from these terrorist attacks, and then that leads into just a whole bunch of stuff that gets slippery.
But that still has an external adversary. I think Frank makes an excellent point. You shut down the oil pipeline, no one has gasoline or heating for their homes if it's natural gas, and we go back to the rule of law. I mean, it becomes Hobbesian rule of law in 30 days or whatever. It doesn't take long for people to start going after each other.
Right.
Well, yeah,
and it's not just China that has those kind of capabilities. Sorry, Scott. I mean, Iran has been developing those kind of capabilities as well. So
yeah, I was just going to mention back in World War II, towards the end of World War II, I didn't even know this existed until I heard, I think it was a Radio Lab episode, and I may have mentioned it on one of these podcasts at some point, but the Fugo balloon bombs, which were which were Chinese balloons that were shot up into the jet stream and were landing in U.S. soil and blowing things up.
Yeah,
and this was
Japanese, but yeah.
Did I say, what did I say?
You said Chinese. But
no, definitely Japanese. Yes. And I didn't even know this had happened or existed. And the U.S. military shut it down. You were not allowed to talk about this on a news broadcast. This was not something that you could tell the American people because of the chaos that would ensue. And now we're moving into this swarm drone technology that could just take this to a whole nother level. So it's definitely an interesting possibility. But quickly, I wanted to switch it back to, we only got about 19 minutes left, and I wanted to switch it back to, since we were talking about China, Frank, have you done any research on the Chinese and their AI program to search for UAP? Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a massive expert on it because there hasn't been that much information out about it. But even if you go back to Project Condon, it was talking about UAP interest in other countries, and China was one that was mentioned. I mean, that was back in the late 80s, early 90s. Right? The Brits were already noting Chinese interest. We've had some more information come out kind of like recently about Chinese interest, but there's certainly been some kind of major UAP events in China. But in terms of the technology, then yeah, I mean, being a game changer technology, it would be of high interest to China to get this, or to sabotage the American program if they can't get access to it. But I think as well, it's something. I mean, the Chinese, people say, well, how far along would they be with it? But in terms of the problems they've been having with their conventional aircraft and the conventional engines, I don't think that they're that far along, because if they were, then they wouldn't be having problems with 1980s engines for their supposed fifth generation jets. That's just my take on it. But in terms of on the quantum side, I mean, the Chinese already declared quantum supremacy, and if you look at those those DoD China military power reports that they have to do every year to Congress, and it really covers all their technology. They take the long-term view. They're looking military, technology, financial, all across the board, and they've got key sectors, key technological sectors that they want to advance in, to basically develop themselves and to steal from other people.
Right.
It also makes that other column convinces me more that other column that's in the UAP public preliminary report, all that more interesting. Like the fact that these countries aren't anywhere, they do not have tech that can zigzag and shoot up from sea level all the way up to 80,000 feet in the blink of an eye. They just don't have it. And that's what, kind of gives me hope in this discussion that, they're putting these theories out there to say, okay, these are the rational, possibilities, and we have other, and yeah, these are one of the days where I'm like, UAPs are real. Tomorrow I'll feel completely different, but like I have no confidence at all that even the most technologically advanced Chinese anything could come close to some of the descriptors that have been given by our air servicemen and women. And so,
well, whoever has it will have global mastery.
Right. I mean, if the Chinese had this, man, they'd be using it.
They wouldn't be waiting to take over Taiwan.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Russia would have reconstituted the former Soviet Union, right? They wouldn't have stopped in half of Ukraine and Crimea. They would have gone back into the Baltic states as well.
Well, they finally would have gotten Finland and Sweden the way they wanted to in the first place. The Winter War would have gone a different way. But I think it's really interesting because you bring up an excellent point, Luis, is that if we look at the capability and the differentiation in the capability between what we know is human technology and not, back to Frank, to your paper, and I think we got a lot of comments about this, the idea that this is human technology, but from the future. I want to pose an interesting, at least in my mind, interesting question from a resources perspective. Would it be more difficult to travel intergalactically, find a way to overcome the differentiation in light travel and the difficulty of what we believe to be super light travel versus time travel or the ability to go back in time?
I think you can easily answer this with Occam's razor, right? We know there are planets that exist. We know that there are exoplanets and planets within the habitable zones. We don't know whether or not we can actually travel backwards in time.
We don't, but we also know that there are humans in the future.
Say again?
We do know that there are humans in the future. I mean, it may only be like 3 weeks of future, but we're going to assume.
Theoretically,
that,
yes.
But I mean, your point though is that we do know there are other planets. That's fair. We do know that there are potentially habitable planets.
Yeah.
We know intelligence exists, at least.
I think it's a fair assumption.
I haven't found any yet.
I think it's a fair assumption. Certainly not on this planet.
As Dr. Michael Masters says as well, he goes, well, we'll find out about time travel when we get to the future, right? If it exists or not, it will exist.
But so
it's a fascinating hypothesis. I mean, I'm super into it. Like I don't take it off the table. I'm just saying if you think about it from, an atomic perspective, it's probably more likely of having an ET than a future human. But at the same time, you make another interesting point, Brooks, is that getting across the galaxy is incredibly difficult. But then you can talk about von Neumann probes, and you can talk about self-replicating robots, and then you have a whole new conversation.
I think best bet, right? If we're really talking about like distance, it's not about trying to create a greater speed. It would be bending space, right?
Right.
But hear me out. If we can bend space, why can't we bend time?
Yeah.
They are, as we are quite aware at this point in time, more or less the same thing.
Yeah.
So.
No, it's a good point. If you can bend space, if you've mastered wormholes and you have the ability to travel through space-time, could you not just do that right here on Earth?
It's just a different dimension.
Could we use science fiction as almost a version of time travel? Like, I think of Star Trek and some of the ideas that were proposed in the 60s through that show, and we're starting to see those things come to fruition. And I think in a way our creative minds are kind of also mapping out the possibilities of what our future could look like.
Absolutely.
If I'm going to follow that logical or that thought process, it tells me that, I think the more logical thing is we could warp through space. We can get to different parts of the galaxies. We can explore the star system just like Lois and Clark explored, the North American landscape.
Hopefully not by eating a lot of mercury and shitting it everywhere.
Right.
Wait, what?
They can actually trace Lewis and Clark's original expedition because of essentially fossilized feces that have mercury in them, because they would eat mercury for regularity. They thought that it would help them stay pooping, which it did, clearly. That's your fun fact of the day, everybody.
And that's why that's why also nobody ever lived like 60 years old was like, Jesus, you're wow, old timer. Like, that makes sense.
Actually, so sort of, but I actually looked into this because I was curious about that exact thing, Luis. And one of the things that is a common misconception, or so I'm told, I can't back this up 100%, is the idea that people didn't live a long time ago. And the truth is, a lot of people did, but it was very unlikely to get through your formative years. So some people did last for a long time, but it was very likely you were going to die at a young age.
The average is offset by those who passed away early. And infant mortality was a huge factor in that. So if you look at numbers, you have to determine, or you have to see whether or not it is adjusted for infant mortality or not. And then even if it is, it still sucks because particularly if you're a female, unfortunately, dying in childbirth was a very common thing at that point in time.
Yeah, so there were some old dudes who were still making babies at 80.
Yeah, Benjamin Franklin. A lot of French children that are probably his kids that, but to go,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, to go back to the technology thing, though, you were bringing up Star Trek and the idea of warping. But again, the idea of warping is essentially folding space.
Yeah.
And
but you're not able to, you can't warp and go back in time with that same theoretical physics.
So the further we get into quantum entanglement and understanding how the universe is developed at its base level, like subquark, we believe, and this is, someone correct me if I'm wrong here, but from my current understanding, from everything I've read, time is just another dimension of reality, right? So if you can warp space, there's no reason that you can't warp time.
Right. But it doesn't mean necessarily it gets complicated.
Jack Sarfati says in my first paper, he says, I've got that Stargate portal. He's talking about the Tic Tac, and he talks about the Skinwalker Ranch, and he goes, the Tic Tac has dual capability both as a warp drive vehicle and as a traversable wormhole portal.
There you go. That is a true hybrid.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, so Frank, I guess I'll pose this question to the rest of the group as well. And I know me and Michael have talked about this, but going back to the whole foreign policy discussion we were having as far as China being a threat and the sort of position they're putting themselves in, especially with Russia and how they're lining up to try and start some shit where there ain't no shit. But I am curious if part of this disclosure that we're seeing in regards to UAP following Occam's razor, is it more likely that we're being visited by an alien civilization with a von Neumann probe, drones, AI, or alien entities themselves? Or is it more likely that we as human beings have actually cracked something significant and wonderful, and this is a way to sort of tell our enemies, you better not. You better not, because we got something in the tank here, and if you guys want to play this game, we're gonna unleash absolute confusing hell all over you.
Are you saying this from a U.S. perspective? Like
yes,
okay,
like our budget, our know-how, our into like the ability to get from the Earth to the moon on a power of a Texas calculator. Like that innovation, I don't put anything past human ingenuity. I genuinely believe that if we wanted to figure out how to make a right angle turn at Mach 16, if we really wanted to figure it out, I think we'd be able to do it.
I agree, but we're not funding it, and that's the problem.
So you think it's more likely that these UAP are interdimensional or interstellar?
I do not believe they are current existing technology.
No, neither do I.
Yeah. I just wanted to throw it out.
I'm
I'm not
told
saying
that
that's
there are
what it is,
some
but
kind of knockoffs.
Yeah, I love throwing this devil's advocate sort of view.
And I like that. But if we were going to do that, then all we would have done was just like transported Trump to the middle of Tiananmen Square, and he would have just been left there for a long time, and it would have been a very easy proof that we can just do whatever we want.
Right.
It could have been Tank Man.
Do you think you'd reveal that tech to the world and waste it on that guy?
No one would have told him. No one.
It would have just been. It was aliens.
And in all fairness, not that we probably have any Trump supporters listening to us, but
don't assume that, bro.
Yeah.
Do not assume that.
With that being said, if we had that kind of technology, no sitting president would be aware of it.
Right.
Frank, what do you think?
Yeah, except maybe Bush, given Bush Senior, given his foreign position, at the CIA.
That's fair.
But fair. I think it would be squirreled away. I keep an open mind as to where the intelligences behind UAP come from. I don't think it has to be one explanation. It could be, like interstellar. It could be interdimensional. It could be time travel. It could be a combination thereof. I keep an open mind.
You brought up earlier, Frank, that it wasn't just what we sometimes see in the skies. It's sometimes the things that you see in the corner of a room or whatever else. I think there are a potential multi-party solution to this.
Yeah, I do. I don't think we're way past just nuts and bolts, and I think we're way past just extraterrestrials as well. I say just. I think we're past all that. Just go to look at Skinwalker. I think we're past all that. I think there's a myriad of potential sources, and it's very perplexing.
I know I'm bringing this up with 4 minutes left in the podcast, but Frank, have you ever seen the declassified CIA documents where they had individuals who were doing meditation with the focus on astral projection, and the CIA documents discussed the potential of their volunteers running into energy beings during their astral projections?
I haven't seen that specific one, no, but I'm familiar with the kind of research. Yeah.
I will find the document and share it with everyone, but it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of similar to what Nick Redfern was saying in Final Events, that there were attempts to using kind of like people, who were effectively mediums, for a better word, trying to communicate with kind of other entities, and they ended up being like horribly killed, like skulls crushed and throats crushed, and by trying to interact with these beings, so whatever they were.
Well, one thing that are going back to sort of you don't think there's a budget for it, or we're not spending money on this type of tech. Our friend who passed away, friend of the show, Kevin Childress, who used to work for the IG, he laid out a pretty easy way for special access programs through the Department of Energy over 2 to 3 decades could easily have squirreled away billions and billions of dollars.
And that's actually excellent, and that's good to know. Not something I'm aware of, but I hope those funds are available. Unfortunately, and this is again coming from someone who is part of the defense industry, I think that we spend a ton of money on outdated and completely obsolete technology just to have it, and sometimes just to continue paying people who produce it.
But I'm a contract, right?
Huge believer in research and development. I mean, if it starts in the defense industry and ends up benefiting all of humanity, great. That's my hope, right?
I know.
So long as the Americans get there first, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
You know what? Hey, I'll be happy.
Then we Brits will be okay as well, right?
Yeah,
my relationship.
The Australians did, the Canadians, as long as it's on this side of the alliance. That's the important thing.
Yeah, that's where I come from. Yeah.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, you guys. What a wonderful conversation. And Frank, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to make sure folks can find you, Frank, on social media. They can follow your writings. Can you tell people where exactly they can locate you, as well as what you write?
Yeah, sure. I'm on Twitter at Franc Milburn. I'm on Facebook as well, but I don't use Facebook kind of so much anymore. I'm on LinkedIn as well if anybody wants to connect. So yeah, I'll be continuing with writing. I'm doing a fair amount of research, mainly getting into like my sources, because I've just got so much to catch up on with the people.
Frank,
that I talk
to. I can't speak for Michael, but I can definitely say for my show, don't be a stranger, man. Anytime you come across something new and you want to talk about it, please knock on the door, and we'd be more than happy to open it for you. Because I do enjoy your research. I enjoy the fact that you always, especially the first time you came on my show, was like, I don't know. I don't know, and I love that answer. And I know a lot of people don't like that answer, but I think that's the wisest answer. I think it's the wisest answer you could give, and I appreciate all the work, all the papers you've written, the people that you interact with daily is just flabbergasting. I can't even imagine the people you can't tell us about, or the things that you have it, stored away that you because you are who you are, and you know how to keep your mouth shut when it needs to be shut. I just couldn't imagine, but I appreciate everything.
Luis couldn't imagine shutting his mouth.
Yeah, couldn't, never. It's just my thing, man.
I've really enjoyed it, guys. I want to thank you very much, and let's do it again. I really enjoyed this one.
Frank.
Doors always open. Frank.
Great, likewise.
So much.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
What a great guy. Super. Well, that was a fantastic conversation. Thank you both for joining us. People were asking Brooks, they were like, how do we find Brooks online? And you're like, you don't.
Yeah, I try. I asked this last week. I'm like, what's Brooks' Twitter handle? Don't have one.
I've got the Cocktails and Calamity one.
Yeah. Here's my burning question, Brooks: is who's the picture behind you?
That's me.
Okay, creepy.
Yeah. It's like the Omen, right?
I was hoping you weren't gonna say, "Oh, that's my firstborn." Yeah. Maybe find something else to put there, Brooks.
Put that there. My wife, who is a wonderful, insane human being. I went on a work trip, and we had designated this was going to be my office / library. I came back. She had built the Beauty and the Beast ladder that you can see behind me. Does not support my weight. Do not jump on that thing. But it does, and I will show you this.
It does move, I bet. Yep.
As he's
it falls off the track.
We gotta. It looks like
back and forth.
Jack Sarfati is in the chat. He's pissed at me. No, Mike, it's not speculation. It's obvious physics. There's only one possible explanation. It's very elementary physics. We're gonna have to have Jack Sarfati back on the show sometime.
But can I get him next time?
What's the elementary part? Because the only elementary physics I know is gravity works. Besides that, all physics is not elementary.
Yeah, physics. I didn't even take a physics class.
Yeah, last time Sarfati and I spoke, he asked me if I knew how to do division, and I failed. So, anywho, Dr. Sarfati, we'd love to have you back on the show sometime to explain the elementary physics of UAP. Any final closing words, boys?
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Hey, is Brooks part of the show officially now?
He can't always be here, but whenever he's available,
if you guys are doing 4 p.m. shows, I will be here. If you're doing later shows, I'll try. I'd love to.
Yeah,
I mean, you guys are phenomenal.
I love awesome
Brooks. Guests you guys get. Hey, I love you, man.
You're just
always fun conversation.
You're way smarter than me.
No.
Way smarter.
It's
like being next to you two guys. I'm like, I'll just let these guys go.
I tell everybody it's not being smart. It's like a Rain Man thing. Like you ask me to do something simple, I'm incapable. Like I got married so that someone would, make sure I'm alive most days.
Oh man.
He ain't lying.
Well, tomorrow on Unidentified Celebrity Review, we're gonna have Avi Loeb and Peter Robbins.
That'll be awesome.
So check that out. And then on Monday we've got Jamarl Thomas coming in to talk about HR 4350 because I want to get his take on it, and that's gonna be a really fun discussion.
Yeah, and I think some of the boys in Discord are doing a chat tonight. So if you guys want to keep this conversation alive, go ahead and click that button and check out the Discord. You can also find us on Spotify. You can find the Singularity Lab and the Unidentified Celebrity Review on Apple Podcast. And we're looking forward to seeing you guys there. All right.
Later. Take care, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, no Singularity Lab next week, right? Because it's Thanksgiving.
Oh yeah, no Singularity Lab next week.
Like full. Everyone's like, oh god, so much turkey
and football. And,
it is.
Yeah. Take care, everybody.
Later. Do you want to know about the future? I do, and I know you do too. That's why we do what we do, right here at the Singularity Lab, just for you. Do you want to know about stories about breaking technology? Science? Look right here, I'm looking at my sheet. Marty did it. Why can't you? Remember, this is a public access channel. We rely on your donations, so just hit the Patreon. So we can continue to bring you updated science and technology breaking news every single day.